We'll get started as soon as you're ready, Alison.
Okay. Just while we're, some more people are joining, if I could remind everybody to keep your cameras off and keep yourselves muted, except for the panelists. It'll help the session go a lot smoother, I think. So we'll just give everybody a minute or two more to join, and then we will kick it off.
I see we've got Ben from New Zealand, which is exciting. I don't know what time it is for you, Ben, but it feels like it should be early.
Yeah, drop it in the chat. Where is everyone tuning in from? I am in Las Vegas, Nevada.
I am in Canada.
Gran Canaria, Spain.
Brooklyn, New York.
Dylan?
Ukraine.
Ooh.
Nice. South Carolina, Toronto. We've got another fellow Canadian here.
Alison, where in Canada are you?
I'm in Kitchener, Waterloo, which probably nobody knows where that is, but I'm about an hour west of Toronto.
So I'm from Ottawa, so I know exactly where that is.
That's perfect.
So we got a couple incognito Canadians here.
Oh, and our other fellow Canadian knows Kitchener. Awesome.
Excellent.
Okay, so just to keep us on target and make sure that we don't go over, I will kick it off. I am Alison, and I am a partner marketing manager with Rewind, and I will be your host today for our session. Just quickly, again, for those who may have joined after I said this, could we please just make sure we stay muted and we keep our cameras off, except for the 4 panelists that will be speaking today. I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to be hosting the event, and I wanted to thank everybody off the hop for joining. Our 1-hour session today is going to be more of a free-flowing panel discussion centered around sharing insights and best practices. We don't have any slides. We don't really have a full or standard agenda. But definitely, if you have any questions, I encourage you to drop them into the chat. I will be monitoring it along with the rest of the panelists, and we'll hopefully get to them near either within the discussion topics or near the end. We'll try to save some time for a Q&A. Throughout our session, our 4 industry veterans will be sharing common e-commerce mistakes and failures that they've seen, they've experienced, or in certain cases, they've maybe had to fix. Our goal today is to share our stories with you so that you don't have to experience them, and you walk away with some knowledge and things to look for when you're either working with a merchant, working with a client, or potentially working on your store yourself. The 3 main topics we'll be discussing today or focusing on are the importance of processes and solid communication, both internally and externally, and how effectively to manage a multi-vendor relationship. So we all know that oftentimes there isn't just one agency involved with a client or a merchant, and it's really important to know how to do that from the aspect of whether you're the agency or one of the agencies or you're a merchant yourself. And we also wanted to take some time to focus on how to scale your business and how to do that properly to ensure that you're not missing anything and you're able to scale to economies without having any issues. Our panel today includes Nihar, who is the Managing Director of Roswell Studios, Ashley, who is the Vice President of Partnerships with Hawk Media, Dylan, who is the CEO and co-founder of Inverat. Hopefully I said that correctly, Dylan. And then Inveterate, sorry. And then, of course, the lady who needs no introduction, but I'm going to make her introduce herself eventually anyway, Rachel, the founder of Ecommerce Agency Growth. Again, just quick housekeeping things. We will get to questions as soon as we can either throughout the discussion or at the end. If you could just keep your your speakers muted or your microphone muted and your camera off, that would be great. Before we get started, I will have the panelists do a quick intro of themselves. So Nihar, if you could kick it off, that would be excellent.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alison. And I do agree, Rachel definitely does not need any introduction. Thank you guys for putting this together, Rachel, you especially, and for having me on the panel today. Super excited to share what I got, and hopefully there is some real positive value for all of the attendees. And in regards to introduction for myself, I am the managing director of Roswell NYC. We are based out here in New York City. We're a team of 35 staff members and growing, mostly here in New York, but remotely distributed, especially since March of 2020 for obvious reasons. We're a 360-degree e-commerce agency covering creative, tech solutions, and growth. One-stop shop for whatever you need for about 70 plus merchants on our roster, ranging from all types of verticals you can imagine. We like to call ourselves the anti-agency agency. We look at all of our merchants as our children, and you can't have a favorite one. You want them all to succeed. We dig into the numbers, and we're very analytical. And we live up to our motto that we're in the business of building businesses. That's Roswell in a nutshell, and I'm looking forward to sharing my thoughts with you all.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nihar. Ashley, could you go next?
Absolutely. Thank you all for having me here today, especially Allison at Rewind, who's hosting. As mentioned, my name is Ashley Scorpio. I'm the Vice President of Partnerships at Hawk Media, your outsourced CMO. We are a full service digital marketing agency and consultancy. Pre-pandemic, headquartered in LA with offices in New York and Boston. Just like Nihar mentioned, we started working from home March 2020, went fully remote. And since then, we have spread out. So we're in 40 US states and counting. We also have a team of 12 up in Vancouver, BC. So we recently expanded into Canada, which was exciting for me as our resident Canuck, as mentioned at Hawk. And I oversee partnerships. So we have over 1,200 partners across 9 different primary categories, which include a lot of the incredible vendors in the space. Darren, I think we got to get you muted here, if you don't mind, so we can continue. Thank you so much. Including all those MarTech, AdTech, SaaS vendors. So I have a really good understanding of Rewind and others in the space and how they can help our merchants. And then my background is actually media buying. So I previously worked on the client side of agencies doing paid social media in particular and earned social media. Also former CMO of a venture-backed startup. So I've been in the marketing space for well over 12 years and in e-commerce specifically for over 5.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ashley. Dylan, could you go next, please?
Sure. Awesome. Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks for having me on here. I've certainly made a lot of mistakes. It was actually hard to think of what to talk about because there were so many. Excited to talk about that. My background is across retail and e-commerce. I previously started an agency called BVA Commerce. So we grew to about 150 employees in about 5 years. And I sold that to a private equity company in 2018. We worked with everybody from Kylie Cosmetics to Movement Watches to Procter & Gamble, Red Bull. So really the whole gamut of kind of small brands that were well funded and wanted to grow, and really fast growing bootstrap brands. And since then, I've done a lot of investing. So I'm an investor in Gorgeous, an investor in Grin, which is like an influencer platform, Malomo, Dacity, and a few others. So doing a lot of that. And then recently raised a pre-seed round to launch a new startup in the loyalty space, which I'm really, really excited about. I think there's a lot of opportunity based on my experience. So excited to be here and hopefully can share something that's helpful.
Wonderful, thank you. And Rachel.
Last but not least, I'll keep it short and sweet. My background being in e-commerce 5 or 6 years. Before that, I've been in SaaS for a long time, but mostly in the tech world. I went to the dark side of agency life back in 2017, 2018, COO of a leading Shopify Plus agency. And for the last nearly 3 years now, I've had my own business or a couple of businesses in the agency space where I work with e-commerce agencies all over the world to help them scale. The topic for this event today is based on something I do at the end of the year with all of my agencies, which is called the Fuck Up Edition. And it's really an opportunity to share all of your fuck ups throughout the year so you can kind of commiserate together. Because if you're in the e-commerce industry moving as fast as it has in the last couple of years, especially since COVID, there's been a lot of mistakes on every which way. So I thought it would be interesting for a panel of people in that space to get together and kind of share some of those So that's me. And Darren not turning his mic off is not my fault. He just can't take care of himself. I think at 51 years old, he'd know better, but clearly not.
Go ahead, Darren. So I apologize. I have the chat open so I can see when people are asking questions, but this banter has me chuckling. So I apologize if I'm laughing. It's definitely not at our panelists, but they make me laugh, this group of people.
Just Darren. We're laughing at Darren, not with him. As long as we're all in agreement with that, then I'm fine. We're laughing at him.
We mock
Darren,
what we don't understand.
I feel like he has broad shoulders, so he can handle it, which is awesome. Just quickly, as I mentioned about myself, so I'm the partner marketing manager with Rewind. Over the past 15 or so years, I've been in marketing and e-commerce in a variety of different industries and roles, from the SaaS platform to being on the merchant side, and actually being one of the people that suffered from some of these situations because of certain things like lack of communication and not having our store backed up properly. For those of you who aren't familiar or potentially not using Rewind, sorry, could somebody mute, because there's a lot of feedback.
It's Victor. Y'all will get called out. So Victor, mute yourself.
This is Ashley's job as well. Sorry, so for those of you who aren't familiar with Rewind, we're the top rated backup and restore application on Shopify and BigCommerce. Essentially what we do is an undo button for SaaS, for stores and SaaS platforms. As most of you know, they don't come with an undo or a backup. And that's really important to have, especially during the holiday season, when the last thing you want is for your store or your client store to go down. What we do is we automatically back up stores, and so that if something goes wrong, we can quickly and easily have your store or you can quickly and easily restore your store, anything from a single image all the way to your full store in just a few clicks. So that's myself. If anybody has any additional questions or anything about Rewind, feel free to reach out to me directly or to Rachel, and she can get you in contact with me as well. So kicking it off, when we were doing our planning, one of the core topics we talked about was poor processes or lack thereof, and how important they are to have. And Nihar had quite a few good points and some stories that he had come across and issues he had come across. So I'm going to turn it over to him and to kick off our first kind of pillar of our discussion. Nihar?
Yes, absolutely. I think the first question was process issues. Is that, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did put a few notes into that document. Is there anything in particular that you wanted me to focus on in regards to process, or just in general, with the challenges that we faced at Roswell and how we've overcome them?
I think overall, what would be best for the audience would be just in general, some issues you've come in contact with, how you've overcome them, perhaps how you've helped your clients overcome them, and just kind of keeping it more of a general aspect.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate that. As a whole, we've, at Roswell, we've scaled. In 2016, we were about 6 people, and then now we're 35. They say the magic number is 16, and then from 16 to 64, you just got to hold on for dear life and make sure and try to make it and until you get to that level. The reason is because during that time, between 16 and 64, you're having to hire a lot of non-revenue adding individuals that are there for middle-level management and management as a whole, and not necessarily executing. So it adds a ton of overhead, and cash flow becomes an issue, and processes become an issue, because it's not just you and 6 of your buddies in a room just trying to plug and chug and get it done. At that moment in time, you need to really figure out how you're going to be able to scale. One of the things that's been an issue in the past, which is tremendously hard to overcome, is overpromising and underdelivering. And that obviously is something that a lot of agencies go through. But essentially, what we had to learn at Roswell is that capacity is a actual physical limited resource, and as such, if you oversell beyond what you can actually deliver upon, you're going to destroy your reputation as an agency and also overwhelm your staff. And it's just a race to the bottom at that point. You really need to find the healthy growth cycle of leveraging a gradual increase in retainers and flat fee projects to hiring the key staffers to then execute and then start selling again. If you hire too much, you'll have to let go. And in short order, that hurts your reputation on bringing on quality talent. If you hire in anticipation of the work that you think you're going to have, and then all of a sudden let them go 3 months later, you're going to be that agency that doesn't really have their stuff together and just hires and fires at will. And the talent is going to be commensurate with your reputation. On the flip side, if you sell too much, you're not going to be able to deliver. You're hurting your reputation with merchants and tech partners that refer merchants your way. We have Rewind is a key tech partner of ours, Klaviyo, Glue, the list goes on and on, Loyalty Line, Yapo, Akendo, Attentive, everybody that we work with. When they send merchants our way, it is our duty to do whatever it takes to deliver for them. If you don't, good luck on getting another one. And that's really, something that you have to be careful of. So again, making sure you don't sell too much and making sure that you can deliver. There's a very delicate balance between the two, between hiring and selling and operations and processes all in the middle of that. And finding that delicate balance, and it's almost like orchestrating a waltz between the two of them. They can't be too out of step with each other, because then you all have two left feet and then you look like a mess on the dance floor and everybody's going to laugh at you. And so essentially that's something that we had to learn. And, we went from 6 to 35. We're actually going to probably be 38 or so at the end of this year. I guess more money, more problems, more scale, more problems. It's the challenge is, if you don't wake up every day with a knot in your stomach, you're not doing it right, I like to say. And I think it's been no worries. Did I say something wrong, Rachel?
You were off the record for a minute, but I think it's all good.
Yeah, exactly. You gave away some dirty secrets. So I had to pause. No, there was a fly on my screen, and I panicked and hit the pause button. Literally.
I was literally about to say her name too, which is funny. So I don't know. Maybe we're on the same wavelength. I was saying that I've been working with Rachel this year, and she helped me understand that delicate dance. And one of the most critical things I think for an agency is moving to the retainer model as fast as possible. It's harder to do when you're young and you're starting out because somebody's going to look at you like, why am I going to give you 30 hours a month? You have no reputation. What are you even going to do with it? Right. But once you get to a certain point, and she said to us, you're 25 people and you're still going block by block. How are you even alive? How are you even surviving? And it got to a point where we had, like a come to Jesus moment. We're like, we are not going to make it. And then Rachel helped us really put together a strategy of putting retainers together that aren't, and selling a merchant on that, because when they hear retainer, they think you're just going to send them an invoice, put your feet up on the desk and wait. And that's not, you have to make them understand that these are strategic retainers. We're working with you so we can balance our throughput in terms of our resources. So we're allocating 30 hours of resources to you, and we are going to plan those 30 hours so that we develop and deliver and retention marketing, creative, everything according to that, and not any less, not any more. And in that way, you can, again, that delicate dance between hiring and selling is you're able to accomplish that. And that was really a game changer for us this year. And, Rachel really helped us out because we were in basically building up tech debt. If you guys aren't aware of what that is, I'm sure if you guys do, but if you're on the hook, no matter what, if a merchant gets a block by block, and if you have 100 hours to deliver on, and it's just been sitting there and they want to cash in, that's like, a run on the bank. You have to deliver. And if you don't have the resources, you're going to fail. And that's something that we were coming up against and had to, get away from because that also was a race to the bottom. Because it's a double whammy. If you're on the hook for 100 hours for a merchant and they try to cash in on that, you have to deliver. Not only do you have to deliver that at probably a cost that you can't take on at that moment in time, you also can't take on other work. And that's really going to destroy you. So those are the things we had to overcome. And I think that goes from the growth when we went from 16, 15 to 25, we didn't change our model. And that really was a difficult thing that we needed to overcome. And, I really do thank Rachel for helping us, helping me see that and overcome that challenge.
Awesome. Thank you.
I like the fact that Nihar makes it sound like I gave him a choice, but whatever.
You never have a choice, Rachel.
You didn't. I know, Dylan, with you at BVA, that recurring revenue model was, you made that decision very, very quickly that was going to be the way that you were going to scale the agency. No? Dylan?
Oh, you were asking me? I thought you were asking me. I'm sorry. Say that again.
Yeah, I was saying that at BVA, you made that decision pretty quickly that recurring revenue was going to be the main focus for you scaling that agency.
Yeah, I would say really early on, it was a focus. And we did that, through to the point of why is somebody going to keep writing checks to you every month? We did that by focusing on being expert implementation partners of the longer term strategic type platforms like Optimizely and Dynamic Yield. There's always a roadmap, and if you're doing the right job as an agency, always a backlog of new opportunities and projects that you can leverage to create a roadmap. And then as long as the work keeps being delivered as promised and everybody's aligned on the roadmap, it kind of becomes standard that relationship lasts a long time. I think on the year that we sold, we were on track to do something like 18 million, and 80% of that would have been recurring revenue and retainers. And then
flex, small flex.
Yeah, no, I'm not trying. I'm just saying it was a good amount though, but
it's a big flex, but whatever.
And the other thing about that was, like, it was easy to fill that with new projects, right? Because like you get the new builds and then you kind of scope it out and you scope out what's like going to be the deliverables. And of course, instead of having scope creep, everybody comes into a new build and then you end up with something that's like bigger than what you envisioned at the first time you met. And so it's easy to just put those into a backlog and say, great, fantastic. We're going to get done on budget and on time, like we said. And then here's this fantastic parking lot and roadmap for us to move into a retainer post launch. So I think a majority of our clients did go retainer. I think I just rambled there a little bit, so sorry about that.
That's all right. I built my business off rambling, so it's fine.
The other thing I just would add to the process side here is that, in my experience, like I said, we grew close to 150 people from zero in 5 years. So there was a lot of the last year that I had the business, we hired like 60 people in the previous 12 months. So the one thing that I would urge everybody here to really take to heart is to understand what you're working towards and work backwards and what processes are going to work in the long run. But a typical stumbling block that I see not only for SaaS agency and direct consumer merchants is over processing early on. So like you're creating processes for the size of team that you have then, and that doesn't scale, or you're putting too much process in place in a time where you don't really have the size for that process to create operational leverage that benefits your business on the bottom line. So that's just one thing I would actually say, when in doubt, less process is better. It doesn't mean you're floating in the middle of nowhere, but less is better than more.
One thing I would add to all of that is to be iterative. I think that just because you have established a process doesn't mean that you shouldn't adapt and change, especially as the times they are changing. I think we've seen so many shifts in our own industry since COVID, like most industries and verticals, and we've seen such explosive growth in e-commerce. It's important to keep up with that. Something Nihar also said about whether everything needs to, on the agency side, if you're offering services, you need to do load balancing between what you're selling and what you're able to fulfill. So as we see demand creep up, especially with this really challenging labor market, at least here in the US, you need to take all of that into account. How soon can you onboard enough account managers if you don't already have them to fulfill the services that you're selling? We have a really strong BD outbound team, which is one of our top lead generation sources other than inbound, of course, and obviously also partnerships. And so we have had to, especially this year in the lead up to BFCM, stop selling certain services because we just do not have enough people on staff to keep up with demand, even though we're well over 200 people and we have 30 open roles. It's just that competitive right now in the space with getting that great talent in-house. And of course, there is time that it takes to get them up to speed, because that's obviously also part of the process, is the training and the expectations that you have for your level of service that you're providing to your clients. But switching gears just a little bit, other than just process sort of on the agency side and interagency or agency to client, I think a lot of you might want to think about the process vis-a-vis the client, and the way that you're servicing them in that way. And I think one of the number one things that I have seen working directly with clients is what I like to call like too many cooks in the kitchen, is when there is a unclear approval process. You might have several points of contact on the client or the merchant side, and it's unclear, or regardless how much you try and confirm or get from them in writing who owns what on their side. I've seen merchants that have like co-CEOs, or they don't have a dedicated marketing point of contact or director of marketing or CMO, and it's sort of the founder or founders. And so oftentimes, if you're trying to deliver whatever you owe them that's within scope in your deliverables, or you're trying to push campaigns live, it is unclear exactly who and in what order on the client side needs to be involved to get approvals for your budgets or your campaigns or your increases or optimizations. So I think that's a really important process that it's important to try and nail down with your clients and merchants if you can. And then the one thing that Allison sort of mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation that really struck out to me is, you're thinking about your tech stack and how to leverage that. The absolute worst case scenario that can happen this time of year, when especially in e-commerce, most merchants are making bank and some of the biggest sales they'll see year round, is worst case scenario is the whole site goes down. And it does happen. And at that point, you're literally counting down how much money you're losing by the minute, by the hour, by the day in revenue. And it's an absolute disaster when it happens. It's really important to have process and solutions in place for that, including on the technology side, like with Rewind. And then inversely, another worst case scenario you could see is, okay, the site goes down, do you have a backup or a solution for that? But also, what if the campaigns go down that are driving traffic during the site during these key, BFCM or Cyber Week sales? That is actually much more common than you would think. And I used to see it all the time with clients that I was buying media for, where their credit card would go down and it would shut off their ad campaigns because they either didn't give their credit card processor a heads up, and it would get flagged as fraud, or they didn't realize that they were close to or had maxed out the card, because if they had agreed X much increase of spend based on performance, they didn't have that available on that card, or they didn't have a backup card set up or sufficient backups. So even if the absolute worst case scenario of the site going down doesn't happen, the other worst potential case scenario would be all the traffic and campaigns shut off that are driving to that site during these peak sales. So that's another just epic process failure I've seen, especially this time of year on the merchant side.
I will say on that note, it's one of the ones that I put in for one of the topics further on. I actually had one of the agencies I work with, they had built a piece of middleware to connect Shopify Plus store with, something on the back end. And they built it maybe 2 or 3 years previously, and the brand had grown significantly. It was working with an external media marketing team, and they decided to throw a couple of $100,000 into Facebook ads just for Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Didn't communicate with the agency whatsoever. Obviously, the app broke, it died, it totally shit the bed. And then the client, then the brand tried to sue the agency for 7 figures for projected lost revenue. And that was a very, very sore lesson for the agency to lose. Now, what should have happened, obviously, is the two would communicate in the background, because the brand was none the wiser as to how much bandwidth that app had. But the fact that the two teams were not communicating, or everybody wasn't on the same page, and that's a very expensive lesson. Very expensive lesson. The whole site broke. Wasn't processing orders, just broke everything. So that they're real problems that can have a massive adverse effect on the agency. Well, they never make that mistake again, but sometimes you have to learn the hard way. They didn't actually get sued in the end. They managed to talk the guy off the ledge and gave them a lot of free work for a while, but it was painful. From my side as well, one of the things that I would add to that, when it came, there's a couple of points that were mentioned that were super interesting. Scaling too quickly. Dylan, you said over-processing. I see this all the time with agencies, where agencies get so caught up in the process, which is essential. It's a big part of what I do with e-commerce agencies when we first start working together. But sometimes people get so married to the process that they don't actually get stuff done. And like Ashley said, especially in any business, but in the agency space that I'm in, a process has to be iterative. It has to be a bit of ebb and flow with the process. And you can't get so focused on the letter of the law that you forget the spirit of the law, because the spirit of the law is the client experience on the other end. So you have to be really mindful of the fact that the process is there to expand and contract, and it's not there to put a noose around anybody's neck. So that's definitely, I've seen a lot of fuck ups over the years with agencies where they've been so focused on process that they're not actually growing as a business, and they're not making strategic decisions for the long run.
Excellent. Rachel, you had kind of started touching on it, but if everybody's kind of got their poor process in place, or their knowledge out, we've also been talking, and when we were chatting about communication, and so Rachel had kind of touched on that a bit with the lack of communication between the merchant and the agency and what ended up happening. But I'm wondering, maybe Ashley, you had another one about client expectations and goals, and really how that's going to impact not only your internal communication with your own team within your agency, but also the external communication. And then of course, the expectations that your client may or may not have with regards to that. So could you kind of pick up there and touch on that as well, please?
Definitely. And I also think poor process can dovetail into poor communication. They sort of go hand in hand. So it also iterates on what Nihar had also mentioned about the scoping and scoping adequately, because also if a client is missold and then handed over to a service team member to fulfill that scope, and that scope doesn't align with their goals, there's also going to be a problem there. So I think it's extremely important to have very frank, open conversations and discovery with the client when you are initially scoping, and understanding, a lot of clients, merchants, think that they know what the solution is to the problem they're trying to solve, but they don't necessarily, right? The reason they're talking to an agency is they might not be a marketer and they might not have that background or expertise. So I think it's really important to be frank and also push back if you have to say, okay, it sounds like this is your overarching business goal. Therefore, this is what marketing goal will align with that business goal. And therefore, these are the types of strategies that would actually feed into those overarching goals. So it starts with that appropriate sort of communication, discovery, scoping. And then I also think that it is, again, through the ongoing service to actually educate, because there is often a lack of education on the client side if they're not a marketer to understand how certain things work. A very common mistake I've seen from clients on media buying side is they'll notice how well retargeting bottom of funnel campaigns are performing, and they'll notice that perhaps top of funnel prospecting campaigns aren't converting. And now most marketers understand that these are just different parts of the funnel, and of course they're going to perform differently, and it's going to be very different to have a dynamic product retargeting ad at a much higher conversion rate versus a net new audience where it's their first touch point. And a client who lacks that basic understanding might say, and I've heard this before, to just double down and turn off all prospecting and put all the money into retargeting. And so that's when you have to step in and educate and say, if we shut off prospecting, the whole funnel, we're not refilling the funnel. We will eventually run out of people to retarget, and we'll see a decreasing in efficacy of even those retargeting campaigns. And you're not continuing to scale and grow and build your audience. But that's where I think that communication is important, is to be consultative, to educate your clients if they lack the understanding, to understand why you're recommending the strategy that you're recommending and the execution. I also think it's important to push back on clients. A lot of account managers will just give the clients whatever they ask for, especially if you have an aggressive client who's very self-assured. And I think it is your duty as a marketer to push back on them and explain to them, I can do what you're asking. However, these are my concerns, or this is what I foresee happening, or I don't think we should do that, and this is what I think we should do instead, and here's why. So I think those are two different facets of, I think, communication are important. So you should be setting those expectations, ensuring they understand what realistic goals are, and you should also, again, ensure they're scoped correctly. And then also, especially this time of year, fires do happen, emergencies do happen. I think it's very important to have an emergency point of contact on both ends, on the client end, on the agency side. In case of emergency, whose cell am I calling, or who's calling me? And is it a shift? If you're a bigger agency or team, or they have multiple team members on your agency side, it might even be certain people are on call certain hours, or the wee hours of the morning, or on the weekend, especially this time of year. So I think, again, that dovetails back into process and having this established process, but then also having that open communication and just being available, making yourself available, especially, like I said, at this time of year.
That's excellent. Thank you, Ashley. I know there was some other comments from the panelists, and Nihar, you had a really good one, which I think will open up the floor to a really interesting conversation of delivering the bad news. And so, kind of to Ashley's point, I'm sure there are a lot of, clients that you guys deal with that feel like they know better, or, they may feel like, well, it's my store or it's my site, and so really it's my choice. But then when the bad news comes because you maybe did what they asked you to do, that's got to be a really hard message to deliver. So I'd love to kind of chat about that a little bit, and Nihar, hoping that you can kick that discussion off.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Allison. We at Roswell, we like to say, don't tell us what to do, tell us what you want to accomplish, and we'll figure out the best way of doing it. And the other thing we also tell merchants is that we're not a vendor, we're a partner in every sense of the word. The minute we start feeling like a vendor, we'll find an agency that you can treat that way. But for us, we're your in-house team, and we're only going to work with you if you have three things. Number one, ambition to succeed. Number two, the funding. And then number three, the willingness to learn. We know e-commerce. We know that's why we're the agency. We're the experts here. We don't know how to make clothes. We don't know how to make hats. We don't know how to make makeup or beauty products, whatever they have you. You guys know that best, and you know your customer best. Let us find the best way of you to connect with them. And that's how we typically operate. Now, on the flip side is, it's inevitable. Deadlines are going to get missed. Externalities happen. You never know. And what we, in the past, when we were a lot younger and we were scrappier, until, we hired a really solid operations team, we would just bet on being able to catch up. And that will bite you in the ass every time. It's better to, in the sense it's better to ask for forgiveness and ask for permission. It's the exact opposite when it comes to timelines. The second you think that something's going to delay, let them know, because they're planning marketing. Just because you're doing one thing for them doesn't mean that that's all they're waiting on from you. There could be 4 or 5 different departments at that brand that are waiting on that particular thing that you are going to be delivering on. And if you give them the heads up 3 days beforehand, good luck getting another project from them, because that they're going to look at you that you're not respecting timelines or even communication. So that communication right there is incredibly critical. And then listening to your team. That's another, when we're talking about process, is listening to your team. If your team tells you this is not going to happen, listen to them. and because they're on the front lines, and as hard, and we had to learn it the hard way at Roswell, as hard as you push and prod, if it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. Let the merchant know and get more time, and then make sure that whatever you do get on that second request, you're able to deliver upon. That's critical, because you only get one, you really only get one shot to readjust the timeline. So make sure you get exactly what you need. But that really is, one of the most important things we've learned at Roswell is, merchants are only going to remember your last mess up. You know what I mean? They everything good you do for them, typically, they're appreciative, but they will remember the last time you screwed up, especially when it comes to timeline. And so you need to be wary of that and get ahead of it when you can.
Great, thank you. Dylan and Rachel, thoughts on communication and the strategies and or issues or situations that you guys have run into that you want to share with the audience?
Sure. I think like two key things on my end is, number one, bring it up first. Like, if there's a big problem, don't run from it. Be the one to bring it up and have a plan to solve it. Number two is I forgot. I had something pretty good and I forgot what I was going to say. But number one is bring it up first and get it done, because, and number two is just keep it professional. People tend to get like worked up, and this is something I had to work on for myself because I get fired up on shit pretty easily. Like, people tend to get really worked up in the moment, especially if it's a client, they're upset about something, and then they go away. And you'd probably do this even in your own relationships in life, right? And then you go sit by yourself in a room for an hour and you're like, okay, actually, maybe this is where I was unreasonable or whatnot. So I think just keep it, no matter what happens with the client, keep it professional, keep it chill, deliver the facts as they are, be the one to bring it up and have a plan.
Yeah, I think the sooner you can address stuff, whether it's an internal issue or an external issue. So this topic of poor communication internally and externally can be on the client side. It can also be on an internal side where you have an employee that isn't working out, you're not gelling with the team. The sooner that you can address that and try and correct it, the better. And like Dylan said, you have to put emotion to one side. At the end of the day, if you're running companies or running departments, we are emotionally invested in the outcome and the success, and it's easy for you to get frustrated and annoyed. They're not my dogs, by the way. They're just random Spanish dogs out in the street somewhere. I feel like they can hear me and just go wild. They'll start howling in a minute. But the sooner you can address that, the better, because at least then there's some kind of remedy. And the chances are the person on the other end of that, they can usually sense it too. They can usually feel like something's not going right. And you'd be surprised how reasonable people can be when you communicate it effectively. So whether it's an employee not working out, project not working out, an issue with a delay, problems, maybe you underscoped something or you didn't accommodate for something, you'd be surprised how accommodating people can be when you put your cards on the table saying, look, this is the situation, here's the options, what do you want us to do? The worst thing you can try and do is cover it up and just try and make it work and try and figure it out, because everybody's going to get to the end of that project and just fucking hate each other and just want to be done with the whole situation. And it just seems dishonest. It seems like the lack of transparency makes it seem like you're being dishonest, and that just ruins the relationship. Like Nihar said, good luck ever working with them again. It's a wrap after that. Another thing I would touch on, which Ashley mentioned earlier, which I thought was a really, really good point. We've seen exponential growth because of COVID. It doesn't matter whether you're in a brand or what walk of life you're on in e-commerce. It's the fastest growing industry in the world right now. It's insane. And I see a lot of agencies, one of the biggest mistakes they make is getting bums on seats just to fill a gap because you've scaled so quickly at the expense of due diligence with onboarding, training, appropriate hiring process, due diligence in the interviews, and setting expectations and goals with people. So you have people that are coming into a job and they're like, I don't know what the fuck I'm supposed to be doing here, because you're just like, I just need to get people in. Let's just get people in. We've got so much demand. We need people. And then, as we're seeing now, the great resignation, there's just a massive churn of people because they've come into a role where there's no leadership, there's no guidelines, there's no expectations, there's no training. People just feel like they're a number and they will leave for another number, a little bit more money, because there's so much going around. So that for me has been a massive fail for a lot of businesses that I've worked with over the last couple of years. There's been a lot of mistakes, a lot of heartache. If you're running a business or leading a team and you've ever had to fire somebody, very rarely is it a pleasant experience. Now and again, you get lucky and you have to fire an asshole, and that feels quite relieving, but very rarely, most times, it's a very unpleasant experience. One of the agencies I work with, I'm acting director of operations, and I had to let somebody go recently, and it was a horrible experience. It causes sleepless nights. So you need to make sure that you do the person justice by putting the time in. I think for me, that's been a big failure that I've seen. I've seen a lot of fuck ups the last year. Poor hires. I know Nihar, we worked through one or two of them where hires where it just was not the right fit, but it was a bum on a seat, and it just didn't make sense. When you look at it from a helicopter view, it just wasn't the right move.
You got to get the right people on the bus. You got to get the people in the right seats on the bus. And then you have to be driving the bus in the right direction and hopefully to the right destination. So that's a big part of it. A lot of what Rachel and others said sparked a few other points for me on communication. Absolutely. If there is a mistake, you should always own your mistakes and own up to them as soon as possible and be forthcoming with the client. And it's the whole other thing. You don't come with a problem, you come with solutions. So if you're going to own up to a client, when you are going to own up to a client, if you've made a mistake, you should come to the table with proposed solutions, not only of what you can do to mitigate the negative fallout and effects on meeting their goals and revenue and KPIs that they're looking to meet with that strategy or with that campaign, but also how you can make it right for them. You know, Rachel mentioned that potential lawsuit where they instead provided free services, whether it's a discount on services, whether it's, you know, removing an invoice or 2 or 10, depending on the magnitude of what occurred, or adding an additional free consultation or service or audit on something. You know, there's always hopefully something you can do to make things right or better with your client. And that also is what builds that trust and rapport to lead to that recurring revenue, that ongoing, that longer term contract, that longer term relationship. So I think that's another one. I also think something that Rachel touched on too is if there is something you need to call out to the client, it's kind of like calling their baby ugly. So, you know, let's say that they get with you and they want you to send traffic to the site, and you realize the site is terrible and it's going to have a really high bounce rate and it's not going to be a good use of anyone's time or money or resources. You've got to tell them, you know, you could run the best possible campaign to send traffic to the site, but if the site is terrible, it's not going to work out. So you just have to remember, especially if you're talking to a founder or, someone who's been involved from the early days, or advisor, investor, it's their baby, right? So you have to try and lead with empathy and maybe a softening statement. And, you know, you also want to make it clear to them that you legitimately care about the outcomes, that it's not just about, let's say, upselling them on a site build or web redesign project, right? That it's legitimately, hey, we can absolutely run these campaigns that we discussed, but if we don't make some adjustments or overhaul the site, this is what I foresee happening, which is, again, just that sort of honesty and transparency. Which also leads me to, when thinking about calling your baby ugly, which is very common terminology in Sandler training, for example, when we're talking about communication training for your staff, especially if you're onboarding new people, because we're seeing employee churn because of the Great Resignation, at least here in the US, maybe globally. And when we think about communications training, often you only give the sales team sales training, or if you specifically have client success managers, maybe they get communications training. I think that anyone that is in a client facing role, even if they're a technical SEO lead, if they're talking to a client, they should have specific communications training. This is the tone, this is the language, this is how we lead with empathy and respect. This is the level of professionalism that we expect from our brand voice as an agency and how we represent ourselves. In every interaction you're having with a client, you're representing the whole agency, not just yourself, which also brings back to the points of when you are getting steamed or emotional, you need to take a step back. You shouldn't ever have sort of a keyboard warrior moment where you get a frustrating email from the client and you just respond in the heat of the moment or flippantly. You should take a step back. That's also why on the agency, it's important to have a pod structure. You know, if you have a peer that can look over the campaign or the communication, or a director or manager, or a head of your channel that can help. That's also another way from a communication perspective, is having that communication and that process to escalate something. So there's a client related issue that's going to need approval for a discount or for an additional service, or needs that higher level of education to the client to get them to understand the strategy. That's when you tap in, especially on the agency side, your colleagues that can help navigate that. So yeah, that would be the final thing I would say on communications. Don't assume that a technical marketer is a great communicator.
Absolutely, Ashley. Thank you. I think one of the best things that you've hit on, and speaking from more the merchant side, is when you're, being careful not to call their baby ugly. One of the bigger concerns is if they've retained you or they're paying you, whatever the relationship is, to drive traffic to their site or to increase their conversion. Ultimately, it's going to be you they come back to when the conversion doesn't increase, when the site traffic doesn't increase. And so if it's the like garbage in, garbage out kind of thing. So if you're doing this killer campaign, but the site is having major issues or isn't, performing the way that it should be, you owe it to them and you owe it to yourselves to ensure that you're successful and really being able to support that client. So I really love that point. I just want to be cognizant and respectful of the time. We are about 10 minutes to the hour. But one of the other topics when we were putting together this session that I thought was really interesting and I think would have a really good, offer a lot of good opportunities and insight is how to manage a client and or relationships with multiple vendors. So, they've got an agency that does site build, they've got an agency that does SEO, they've got an agency that does content, et cetera, et cetera. And Dylan, you had a really interesting point of having a backup on a backup. So I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little bit on that for our audience, and really help them understand it. It's going to happen. You're going to have clients that have multiple agencies. You're going to have agencies that maybe don't do everything. Maybe they are just exclusive to web design. So I'd love if we could take a little bit of time to talk about that. And then I did see that Rachel put in questions from the audience. So love to have those added to the chat if anybody has those as well.
Sure. I would say, even when I look at the most experienced operators, people that work in e-com running large brands, the gotcha moments continue to happen when something goes wrong with a vendor and they're totally stuck. Oftentimes things like your supply chain, your 3PL, different things like that. Things that are, there's a book I really like called The Theory of Constraints Management, and it just talks about the specific things that are total constraints on your business, that if those go down, then it's over. And so it's just really critical to have 2-3 vendors on backup in any given channel, because you don't know if somebody's going to be ready to go when you need them, often in an emergency. And then secondly, it's build a relationship with those people. These might be salespeople that have been blowing you up from a competing 3PL to the one you use. Instead of blowing them off and being a jerk to them, actually develop a relationship with some of these people, these vendors, because you might get hit with your 3PL next week and it's an emergency. And now you've got someone that you can call that you have a relationship with and plug in immediately, who's going to be willing to do a favor for you. So that would be my biggest advice on that.
Yeah, never shit where you eat. It is a very small industry, so at all costs, it's not worth it. Like Dylan mentioned earlier, it's about just keeping your cool. At the end of the day, I had a call earlier, a group call with a private mastermind that I run, that Dylan was on the call, and we were kind of joking and saying this job, doing what we do in this industry, would be so easy if it wasn't for the people. At the end of the day, we are in the business of dealing with people, and it's all about relationships. And I think that building those relationships with your internal team, your clients, external vendors, strategic partners, that can hide a multitude of sins. Again, I just had an agency last week that they worked with a marketing agency that had a project, and the marketing agency was preparing all these Black Friday, Cyber Monday campaigns. Site was supposed to go live a few weeks ago, massive delays. And now the marketing agency has come back and asked for a refund from the agency, and that relationship is dead. Again, poor communication, but if they had actually invested time in building that relationship with the agency, then it wouldn't have gone straight to, I'm going to sue you, or you're going to have to give us more money, or you're going to have to cover the costs of this contract that the client has cancelled, because they were so busy being busy that they didn't take the time to really build the relationship. So that relationship piece is super important across the board.
I would 100% agree. And I think, Nihar, you had mentioned something about that as well, the quality over quantity. So it'd be interesting to get your perspective on that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think when I was prepping for this, I had thought that how are you managing multiple merchants at the same time? So, but I do have some opinions on this as well too. Is that quality over quantity is essential in any aspect of what you do. You can brag and say that you have 70 merchants on your roster, but if it's 70 merchants that are driving you insane, or not profitable, then it doesn't really matter what that number is. I'd rather have 5 than 70 if my entire team is happy and that we're profitable. And that really is important to understand. And we go through this process every year where we, and I was talking to Rachel about this morning, is grooming your merchant roster and understanding, where you are at as an agency is the caliber of merchant that you're going to be able to work with, and it's okay, and it's okay to let go as well too, as you continue to scale and grow, to make sure that the merchants you work with are at your level. I mean, we had it once where a merchant told us that they outgrew us. And that was hurtful. It sucked to hear that, but it does happen, and so you need to understand that as you are continuing to grow, merchants may outgrow you and you might outgrow your merchants. But again, it's quality over quantity. And then back to the topic you were talking about with multiple hands in the bucket, with one agency doing paid media, another doing SEO, another doing email, another doing design and development, et cetera. When we know that's happening, we make sure that with the merchant that we have a conversation, we let them know that full stop, you're not going with Roswell for all of your services, which is totally fine. We're happy to work with the other agencies, but we need to be in lockstep with what they're doing. Because if they're paddling north and we're paddling south, you're not going anywhere. And so we need to understand, like if you're paying another agency for SEO, and they come to us with development requests for schema markup, and we have 0 capacity or 0 hours, that's not getting done that month, and that's that. So you just paid, your SEO retainer without any sort of return on that. And so we need to be in contact with each other to make sure that we're all paddling in the same direction, so to speak. So that was kind of my bookend on what Dylan was saying in regards to multiple hands in the bucket, so to speak. And then quality over quantity. It's really important to understand that, that I can't stress that enough, and don't be afraid to let go.
Love it. That's excellent. We did have one question come in from the audience, and it's actually around, how do you manage multiple merchants at the same time?
I was just going to, I know why Victoria's asking this question, because we spoke about scale. Don't be afraid to scale. If you're in a situation where you have multiple clients that you need to figure out a way to scale, you can scale up or you can scale out. I think COVID has had most of us scaling out because I tried to squeeze into this dress today. But you have to decide, are you going to scale out in terms of the size of your team? Or are you going to scale up in terms of make the services that you offer tighter, charge more money, have less clients? Are you going to hit $1 million with 10 at 100K or 100 at 10K? That's really the decision you make. But ultimately, managing multiple merchants, multiple clients is about scale, either up or out. That's the only way to do it.
And then inversely, just quickly on that point, I've seen the same mistake on the merchant side where they're managing multiple vendors, like multiple agencies, and maybe not doing it as well as they could. Either inadvertently or purposely, they're keeping them in the dark or keeping them siloed or disparate or separate. If you have a web dev agency, you have a creative agency, you have a performance marketing agency, put them all together. They should all be aware of each other. They should know who is owning what the scope of each one is. If someone is doing, media buying over on the performance side, they need to coordinate with the person at the other agency who's creating the creative for their campaigns. In an ideal world, not only would you introduce them all to each other and have awareness about what the scope is of everyone and their deliverables, but also you might have a recurring call where you get all the agencies together with you on the client or merchant side, to know that everything, to Nihar's point, that you're all hopefully paddling or rowing together in the same direction. Success.
Absolutely. So we are at our time. And I wanted to give a huge shout out to all 4 of our panelists, and thank you very much for your insights. Definitely hope that everybody's taking away some key mistakes and issues that we've discussed to ensure that you do not cross those paths, or unfortunately cross those paths. But just before we break, I will turn it over to Rachel. She can give us a quick outline of next steps. As you all know, the session was recorded. So I'll ask her to let us know how and when that will be available, and what you can expect from the remainder of the session.
I'm going to send everybody an invoice for 10,000 euros, and that's my way of scaling up. No, I'm just joking. Yeah, this call was recorded, so what we're going to do is I'm going to get that uploaded onto my YouTube channel. I'm also going to send it out for all the people that signed up. I'm going to send it out via email, and then I will pop it up on LinkedIn and tag some of the people that attended. When I send it round on email, I'll make sure that I tag all of the panelists, and also Alison as the host. So if you want to connect with any of them, I'll probably, if I remember to put the LinkedIn in there, that you can connect with people individually so we can continue these kind of conversations afterwards. Is that good? Is that professional? I didn't drop a C-bomb today, so that's progress.
I think it's fabulous. Again, just maybe one more quick, does anybody have any more questions for our panelists? As Rachel mentioned, absolutely, you can connect with any one of us via LinkedIn or any other way through our organizational sites. But before we break, does anybody have any more questions?
If anybody wants to go rogue and unmute and jump in with a question, you're very welcome. Now is the time to shine.
Darren?
He's gone. Don't worry, he already mentioned He said that he had to take a phone call, then he saw everybody smiling and assumed that I'd said something nice about him.
I would love the opportunity to jump at it if I get a chance. I basically would just love to ask about, difference about retainers and flat fee. Like, when do you know which client to do what with? Like, how to position it?
I could take that one. I've had.
Thank you.
Is that okay, Rachel and Alison?
And Dylan and Ashley, go for it.
So that's a great question. I think, and again, it goes back to the discussion that I mentioned earlier about knowing where you're at in terms of the matriculation of your agency as you continue to scale and grow. I think when you're smaller and you're scrappier and you can, get a request and have it done that afternoon, you can go with just blocks of hours or flat fees or whatever the case may be. I think as you scale and you have to worry about cash flow issues, that's when you need to start, focusing on getting 70 to 80% of your business into being monthly recurring revenue via retainers. And so the question that you're asking is, which merchant makes sense for which? Well, those merchants that are ready to scale, ready to grow, and that have an open mind and that are willing to listen and be strategic, those are the ones that you really want to focus on for retainers. The merchants that think they know it all, but still, are okay to work with, but really are just merchants that are we call them flex funds. Just you have a bucket of hours that sit around for however long they want, as long as it's clear to them that if you do request something, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be done that afternoon. If you request something, you go into the queue. That could be 3 weeks, that could be 6 weeks. It just depends on where it is. We will endeavor to get you in as quickly as possible, but as long as they're comfortable with that, a healthy mix of flex funds and retainers is works. But not every merchant's going to come to you and say like, okay, help me build my business to 10 million in 2 years. And how are we going to do it together? Some are already going to come with their own strategy and are just looking for you to support them when they need. And the latter is the ones that you should probably just focus on, flex funds or flat fees.
Can I just sort of jump in there? Dave, you're coming from the brand side, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Kind of, and no, actually, I've done both sides.
Okay.
So, but I am actually just developing a new agency with a partner of mine. So, I'm kind of open ears. I've done a lot of WordPress development on that side of things, and I have had some, a couple of years ago, a Shopify experience as part of me. I've got a dog that's crazy as well.
I think I would just add to that, guys. Three key things. Number one is, does your team like working with them? So if you did a project together, I think it's table stakes that like people actually want to work with them. Number two is, do they have an appetite to grow their business? It might sound silly, but there's a lot of businesses that are 12 million a year, 15 million a year, and they're not really looking to grow their business. And retainers don't often work out well for that because they don't have in their mind a justified need for it. You're not helping them achieve some strategic objective. And so it's a constant validation of like why they're spending the hours with you. And then number three is, it's important to avoid customers who are looking for you to be their magic bullet. Like they need to have a great product and a market to go after, and have a lot of good things going on in their business. Especially when you talk about smaller customers, they tend to go to an agency and it's like the one thing they're investing in, and it's the, a big investment for them, and they think that whatever it is you're doing is going to be their silver bullet for success. And I think those are clients to avoid, because their expectations are probably unreasonable.
Yeah, I think that's what I made a note of.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
There's an expression I learned the hard way a long time ago: not all money is equal. And I think that that's very true. Getting 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 from an amazing client is very, very, very different from receiving the same amount of money from a total asshole. So I think if you're going to work with a client on an ongoing basis, again, it doesn't matter. I mean, if you're in the SaaS selling products, it's slightly different because your touch points are much less. But if you're in the services industry, vision, like, do you understand their vision? Are you aligned with what it is that they're looking to achieve? Do you believe in what it is that they're doing? If you don't, then you're just taking money from somebody you don't believe in. I spoke to a consultant recently who is a leadership consultant, who specializes in leadership. And he told me that he was working with a couple of clients and he's just like, this guy isn't a leader. He's never going to do it. It's never going to work. But he's just signed on for a 12-month contract. So I'll, stay on the calls with him, even though I know he doesn't have it. And I feel like that's just a really bad strategy, because eventually that person is going to, you're totally taking the piss. In the work that I do, there's a lot of agencies I've had to go through this year, culling at least half of the agencies that I'm working with, because I'm just like, you don't have the same appetite. You're not putting the work in, the enthusiasm isn't there. And the other thing that Dylan mentioned, which I believe wholeheartedly, managing expectations. If you're working with people, we are in the business of managing expectations and making sure those expectations are aligned internally, externally, vendors, clients, merchants, all the way around. If you're not managing and setting expectations, you're going to fail. So if you're going to go and get into a relationship or proverbially get into bed with somebody on an ongoing basis, you have to make sure that you believe in their vision, and you have to make sure that both expectations are aligned. Otherwise, you're basically fucked. I think there was one more question. I know we're running over a wee bit. There's a question from Victor.
Yeah. What is the best strategy to prevent a sales team from accidentally selling solutions and not allowing for a proper discovery phase? And then he did follow up with, so Ashley and him had a quick chat about training and access to service team experts. But the second part of the question was, do you recommend them to have control over the scope, or should that be left to someone else in the organization?
So I'm happy to build on this.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm happy to build on this. So number one, you should have a very clearly defined sales process. And a big part of that sales process should be discovery. Your first call probably should be a discovery call, and there should be very set questions that they have to scope out the needs or wants of the client. And again, just because they identify their needs doesn't mean that's actually what they need, which is why it's important to dig deeper and understand what they're actually trying to accomplish to make sure you are providing the right servicing solutions to meet those goals. And then, yes, what I would also say beyond that is, for at least at Hawk, something that we do is we have service team experts come in daily to train the sales team on the latest and greatest and what to look out for, what to listen for, what to ask about, and when to suggest their services. So it's really important to have that strong internal communication and training, and also ensure that your sales team members actually have hopefully a strong background in marketing to know what the right solutions are, and also to have those internal resources where they can bring in a colleague from the service team or the channel head even, specifically to help scope it out and to set the strategy so that they are sold correctly and in turn set up for success.
I was being facetious. I was going to say, what's the best strategy to prevent a sales team from selling solutions instead of discovery? I was going to say death, but I feel like that might be extreme. But no, again, that comes back to the point that Dylan made earlier about setting expectations. And also it depends on what it is you're selling and what the scope is. I have some agencies that selling, 20, 30, 10, 20, 30K projects, and other agencies are selling 200, 300, 500, $1 million projects. So it really depends on what the scope is, but setting expectations with the sales team, putting a proper process in place. So you're like, this is the state of affairs. This is the way we do things. Me personally, I'm a huge advocate of selling paid discovery. I feel like that's the best way to get a sales team off the ground. If an agency is looking to scale, you bring a salesperson in, you train them up on selling discovery, and you have them on calls, engaging with clients, qualifying clients, selling a discovery. And until they have the knowledge, you hand that over to somebody who's more qualified to actually go through that discovery piece. You're going to be 10 times more profitable. You're going to have less risk of over servicing and under scoping. Scope creep is going to be less of an issue. The expectations are going to be more clearly aligned. The budgets are going to be more realistic. So I would just, again, that's good communication with your team of letting them know that this is the process. With most of the agencies I work with, I have introduced paid discovery as a mandatory part of their process, and it's a non-negotiable. And the bottom line doesn't lie. The agencies are so much more profitable because of it. And then deciding who has control over the scope. It depends on the skill level and what it is they're selling. If they're selling products, it's so much easier to say, okay, here is your Klaviyo package, here is your block of hours, here is your discovery piece. If it's much more consultative, which it is in the agency space, you give it over to somebody who knows what they're talking about. Otherwise, it's just going to look like amateur hour.
I'd also say it gets easier the more you specialize, and that's something I always push on people is specialize in very specific things as much as you can. Maybe if you're an agency, that's all the way down to we work specifically with CPG brands or luxury beauty brands or whatever it is. But the more that you specialize and you're doing the same type of thing over and over, the more accurate and easy all of your scoping and delivery is. Because culturally, from the type of way you deliver all the way to the institutional knowledge you develop internally, it just adds those like efficiencies to it that you can never get if you don't specialize.
Absolutely. Thank you. So again, we're just a little bit over. So I will wrap it up. Thank you for letting me host this awesome session. I hope everybody had a great time and learned a lot. Again, just for everybody to know, Rachel will be sending the recording out and we'll tag the panelists in on LinkedIn, not in LinkedIn. And if you want to connect, just touch base with anybody through there. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye everyone.